working with the second-generation survivors to help them tell their own stories. The mission of Voices of Hope really weaves in so perfectly with our mission at Speak Up in helping people tell their true stories and helping people connect, and it's just been such an honor to be involved in this process. Voices of Hope is an organization I feel really passionately about, and I feel really lucky and honored, and I know Matt does too, to play even a small part of it. Sharon and Jeff and Lois, Peter, Evelyn, Matt, and I met for only over 3 weeks. When we started, we were really, this was new to all of us. Matt and I had never done anything like this before, and everybody was just so gracious and willing to work, and what they came up with in this short amount of time is terrific, and I'm excited to present it to you today. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first storyteller. It's Sharone Kornman. Hold on, Sharon, I'm going to talk about you. Sharon is the daughter of 2 survivors and has been a member of Voices of Hope since its inception. Sharon has 3 kids, one of whom I was lucky enough to teach right here at Solomon Schechter sometime probably around 2000, I would think. He's a grown-up now. Sharon has been practicing law in the Hartford area for 26 years. In preparation for today's show, I asked all of our storytellers to tell me their favorite Yiddish or Jewish expression, word, or phrase. And I love what Sharon responded with. She told me her favorite word is shmata, and she gave me a wonderful explanation. I'm going to read it to you verbatim because it's perfect. She said, shmata rhymes with gada, means a rag, but here's how her mother Irene uses it. Here's a shout out to Irene. Here's examples. I picked up some shmatas from Saks, meaning beautiful, expensive clothing. I gave away that blue shmata, it owed you nothing, which means I hated that old shirt, so I tossed it. Taka shmata means literally what a shmata, but Irene means I don't like that person. And every now and then she might say, grab a shmata and wipe up that mess, which is the literal and proper use of shmata. So that was terrific. Sharon, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm so happy to introduce Sharone Kornman. Make sure you're set with the mic. Yeah.
I think that's good. Okay, it's July 2013, actually 3 years ago today. I'm standing in front of a large blue-gray house in Drohobych, Ukraine, formerly Poland. I've come to this place to see where my mother, Irene, grew up before the war, and also to see where she was hidden during the war. I'm here with 7 other people. I'm here with my mother, the memory keeper, my husband, the cameraman, my brother, Randy, the jokester, my 2 cousins, Claudio and Jack, and our tour guides, Genya and Peter. Genya is someone I only met the day before, but she and I have a history that goes back to decades before either of us were born. So I approach the house, I approach the door, and I jiggle the handle, and the door opens. And I enter without hesitation, because I have every right to be here. This was my mother's house, and the Germans took this house at the beginning of the war, and then, or when they entered Poland, and then the communists took the house afterwards and subdivided it into multiple units. And that's how it still looks today, multiple units. So we enter and we knock on the first door, and somebody asks, and a woman answers the door, and someone explains in Ukrainian that we would like to see my mother's childhood home. And she barks no, and she slams the door in our faces. And we slide, and I think, she knows why we're here. We're gonna take back the house. She doesn't want to talk to us, and she hates all Jews. But today I see it differently. It's early in the morning, she's trying to get ready for work, and 8 complete strangers want to get into her house. Of course she's not letting us in, would you? So we angrily slide over to the next door and knock, and no one answers. And by the time we get to the 3rd door, an old lady answers. She's already heard the commotion that 8 people are making in the front area of the building. She will let us in, but she needs 20 minutes. Of course she needs 20 minutes. She's going to hide the silver. Or maybe she's going to sneak out a back door and not let us in at all, just like that first lady. So she closes the door, and we wait in that entryway that used to be the parlor of my mom's home. And my mother is giving us a virtual tour. You see that peephole in the front door? There was a peephole, and I used to peek out when someone came to the door. And this little staircase, the door under the stairs, sometimes Lucic and Paula and I played a hiding game. And the floor here was a beautiful, dark, inlaid wood. And I look at the door, there's no peephole. And I look at the floor, and it's an ugly vinyl. Nothing she's describing is there. So the lady finally lets us in, and we go in. And the whole unit where she lives and where her son runs a podiatrist practice is maybe 500 square feet large. It's so small that as we walk around, we're bumping into each other. And we're looking, and we're photographing, and we're touching, and we're asking, Mom, was this here? No. And what about this, Mom? No. What was here? And my mother says, I don't remember. But basically, this was my older brother Lucic's room, and maybe a part of another room. So when we're finally done, after what seems like a long time, but really is probably less than an hour, we thank the lady and we say goodbye. And then she says, wait. And she approaches a cabinet, and she removes a box. And I look at my brother Randy. Now she's going to give us the treasure we came for. And she opens the box, and he's thinking the same thing. And there's no treasure in the box. It's just some painted wooden Ukrainian eggs. You can buy them in any corner shop in Ukraine for less than $1 a piece. And she smiles, and she gives each one of us an egg. And I'm speechless. This is not what I came for. This is not what I wanted. But this is all she has. She's actually a very poor person, and these are her treasures. And we take them, and we thank her, and we start to leave. And my brother presses $50 or $60 into her hands to thank her. And she could live like a queen for a month on that money. She's not insulted, but she won't take it. And as we walk away, she leans over to my mother and says in Ukrainian, my grandmother was half Jewish. So we came to this house to see where my mother lived before the war. Her father was a well-to-do man, and he designed and he built this house. There were so many nice things. There were private lessons, there was custom-made clothing, there were trips abroad, and there was a beloved nanny named Franya, who never had children and loved these 3 children like her own. On September 1st, 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland, and everything changed in a blink. My mother lost her house, her possessions, and her brother, Lucic, who died of an untreated infection at the beginning of the war. And they also lost Franya. In the months that followed, they were shuffled from one place to the next, each more terrible than the last. And in 1942, all the remaining Jews in the town were moved to a ghetto. The conditions were deplorable. Adults could work outside the ghetto, but children and elderly were useless, so they were targeted for elimination. My mother was 11, and she would not survive. So her parents reached out to Franya, please save Irene. And on Christmas Eve, 1942, when Franya knew that the ghetto guards would be drunk and inattentive, she stole into the ghetto, and she wrapped Irene's curly Jewish hair with a scarf and walked her out. And nobody noticed this mother and daughter walking out and singing Christmas carols that Franya must have taught my mother in another lifetime. In the months that followed, my mother would hide under a bed quietly while Franya went to work. And after a little while, Franya went and got my mother's mother and sister from the ghetto. And for the rest of the war, the 4 women lived in this apartment and in silence. Franya went to work, and the 3 women were quiet. Because if anybody heard footsteps, they would know somebody else was in the apartment. And they lived on Franya's 1-person rations. So we've come now to the courtyard of Franya's apartment. And it's still sunny, and the flowers and the trees are still blooming, but it's later in the day. and some people have gathered, and they're standing around in the doorways. They're looking, and we're wondering, what are they thinking? Do they recognize my mother after all these years? Do they know that we're Jews? Do they wonder what we've come back for? And my mother points. Look there, that window. That was Franya's apartment. And I look and I see a window with a metal grate. And look across the courtyard. That was a Gestapo headquarters. It was so close, we could hear them talk at night sometimes. I've never seen this place, but I've heard it. I've heard about it my whole life. It's like a bitter fairy tale with no physical description. And I say, Mom, let's knock on the door. Somebody will let us in like they did in that other house. And my mother is quiet. And she says, no, I don't want to go in, and I don't want any of you to go in either. We've come across an ocean, and then from Poland to Ukraine by van, at great expense and great inconvenience, just to see this place. And we're not going to go in. And that's okay. But I did learn something on this trip. I learned a little bit more about Franya and what happened after the war. I learned that when the war was over, my grandfather saved up some money when he was able to work and gave Franya 100 gold coins, and that she lived on those coins and her family all during the horrible years of communism when other people were struggling. And I learned that when I was a child, I remembered my mother used to make little care packages of coffee and cookies and some clothing we outgrew, and she would send them to Poland. And I wondered as a child, don't they have coffee and cookies in Poland? I mean, who's going to wear the clothing? But I learned on this trip that they sold those items and they lived on those as well. And that one year, they actually replaced all the windows in a house in a rough winter with the things my mother was sending. So it's okay that I came this far and I didn't see this place. There's nothing really here for me to see, and there are no wooden eggs for me to collect here. Thank you. Thank you.